Welcome, everyone, to this webinar on the Flourishing Schools Project at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard. I'm Tyler Vanderweel, Loeb Professor at the Harvard School of Public Health and Director of the Human Flourishing Program. I'm being joined by Dr. Christina Hinton, who leads our work on flourishing and education here at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard, and also CEO and founder of Research Schools International. We will be covering what we have been working on these last 3 years on developing both theoretical and measurement frameworks for enhancing flourishing and character development in schools, and also forming communities of practice to advance this work. I will be providing a high-level overview of some of our theoretical and measurement work, and then Dr. Hinton will turn to discussing our Flourishing Schools project itself and how we hope to partner with networks of schools to advance this work on flourishing and character development. But first, I'll let Christina say a few further words about our work together.
Thank you so much, Tyler. We're really excited to be here. We're in a really inspiring moment in the field of education at this time. The shifting landscape, including the onset of AI technologies, the youth mental health challenges that we face globally, requires us to re-envision how education might nurture students' holistic well-being and empower them to make meaningful contributions to the changing world. So in response, there's an international movement toward expanding the purpose of education from narrowly defined academic outcomes to promoting students' academic learning in concert with their holistic well-being. There's leading international organizations such as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and UNESCO that have projects toward this goal. At our program, we define flourishing in a way that is universally considered, or at least nearly universally considered, to contribute to a good life. So the domains that we've included, which Tyler will tell you more about, seem to resonate with many individuals all around the world. For that reason, and also because we've operationalized our conceptualization of flourishing with measures that allow us to monitor and track progress over time in a variety of countries, languages, and cultures, we believe that flourishing could be poised to serve as a North Star for this re-envisioned educational approach.
So with that, I will give an overview of the theoretical framework and ideas that have been guiding this work on the role of education for flourishing, the limits, the potentials of these ideas, which will also motivate our own approach to advance flourishing and character development in schools. I'll discuss briefly what it would take as the proper scope of education for flourishing, and then go on to describe a metrics framework, which we developed in collaboration with the OECD on various aspects of flourishing and character formation that are critical to education. The working definition of flourishing that we've used at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard is that flourishing is the relative attainment of a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good, including the contexts, communities, environments in which that person lives. Understood in this way, flourishing is multidimensional and all-inclusive. One may be flourishing in some ways, but not others. Flourishing is also an ideal. It's not something we ever perfectly attain in this life. It is something that we aspire to, but there is always room for improvement. And finally, flourishing includes the context, communities, and environments in which a person lives. And this is, of course, critical in the context of education as well. The flourishing of a student includes the well-being of the school, of the teachers, of the parents as well. Next slide. So there has also been critique on the notion of flourishing as a North Star for education, with some claiming that that's too broad of a scope for education to aspire to. And I think there are reasonable grounds for this critique, insofar as schools cannot be held accountable for all aspects of students' flourishing. Student flourishing is also affected, of course, by family life and parents, by neighborhoods, by religious communities, and by other factors that shape a student's well-being. And yet, to say that schools should really only focus on advancement of knowledge and cognitive capacities seems too narrow. There are, of course, countless anecdotes about students whose lives have been transformed by an important teacher, by their experiences of school or through a sports team. And so I think we need to acknowledge the incredible potential for transformation. And so what we've tried to do in work at the program is to clarify what we take as the proper scope for education for flourishing, acknowledging, in fact, that there are also important feedback that takes place between advancing knowledge and the epistemic aims of schools and between flourishing. Certainly, the learning that takes place in schools enhances student flourishing, but it's also the case that when students flourish, they become more able to learn. And so, next slide. What we would take as the proper scope for efforts for education for flourishing would be as follows, and this is spelled out in greater detail in this paper in the Journal of Philosophy and Education with Christian Christensen. But we would take it first as the developing of students' knowledge, understanding, and the cognitive skills and epistemic virtues that facilitate knowledge and understanding, all of which, of course, enables both present and future flourishing. So what is central is the development of that knowledge, understanding, cognitive skills. But it's not just that. It's also the promotion of those aspects of student flourishing, not all aspects, but those aspects of student flourishing that are subject to two conditions. First, around which consensus can be attained, and second, concerning which teachers and educational leaders are prepared to address. So teachers are not responsible for all aspects of student flourishing, but only those for which there seems to be a reasonable degree of societal consensus. And what we would argue at the program is that would include happiness and health, meaning, character, social relationships. These are things almost everyone desires. But we focus on those aspects of flourishing around which consensus can be attained, and also those concerning which teachers and educational leaders are prepared to address. Importantly, the second restriction is not one that is static. It is one that can be enhanced by additional resources, by training. In some sense, that second restriction is aspirational to make the extent, the scope of flourishing as broad as possible, while acknowledging that there are limitations in time and training that might exist. But we feel by specifying the scope of education for flourishing in this manner, we can address many of the objections that have put forward and yet also help enhance student flourishing and character development. Next slide. And thus, a couple of years ago, we were commissioned by the OECD to develop a framework for metrics for education for flourishing, capturing not just whether students are flourishing at present, but also whether they're being empowered to flourish in the future. This framework involves three pillars, each of which operates both at the individual level and also at the institutional level. Those three pillars are first, present flourishing, because present flourishing will unquestionably affect future subsequent flourishing. Second, academic attainment. And third, the development of character and character skills, important both for learning now, but of course also for one's future flourishing. So I'll comment briefly on each of these three pillars, first at the individual level and then at the institutional level. With regard to present flourishing, it's very clear from the empirical studies that our current flourishing, our current relationships, our current health, our current sense of purpose affects our capacity to flourish in the future, and does so across these domains. So it is, of course, critical to assess whether students are flourishing now. This is important in its own right and important in enhancing future flourishing. Next slide. And we have developed a measure for flourishing, which we've used with millions of participants around the world, initially for adults, but in collaboration with Christina, now with measures for adolescents and for 9 to 11-year-olds with current experimental work with 5 to 8 year olds as well. But this measure focuses on 5 or 6 domains of human life. And the questions are here, but those domains are happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, and close social relationships. We do typically supplement these 10 questions on this slide with 2 others on financial and material stability. And we've adapted our adult measure to be more appropriate for use with adolescents and others. Next slide. The second pillar in this framework is academic attainment. This, of course, is central to what schools do, and there's abundant evidence, once again, that educational achievement does affect subsequent flourishing. It affects subsequent employment, income, social connectedness, likelihood of marriage, happiness, mental health, and so on and so forth. Again, many schools are doing this very well already, but we do want to acknowledge that the second central pillar is critical to enhance student flourishing. And next slide. And then finally, the framework raises the notion that social, emotional, character-based skills and capacities are essential to lead a flourishing life. Essential both with regard to learning now, but essential in interactions with others subsequently, seeking what is good. Clear evidence, once again, from empirical studies that various aspects of character subsequently affect one's subsequent mental health, happiness, relationships, and so on and so forth. And so it's critical that students are being formed in character and developing character skills. Next slide. But this proposed measurement framework is looking at these matters not only at the individual level, but also at the institutional level. Some of what we report on at the institutional level is simply aggregates of the individual level assessments. But really, the flourishing of a community, of a school, the need for these institutional level pillars extends beyond simply the aggregation of how well each of the students are doing. There are certain systems level metrics that cannot be reduced to the average of those individual assessments. And so I'll briefly be commenting on each of these. Next slide. So first, with regard to flourishing, it's important to ask not just our students flourishing, but also ultimately our teachers and staff flourishing. And is the school flourishing as a community? Are there good relationships within the school? Proficient leadership, capable of leading and guiding the school well? Healthy practices and structures that allow the school's life to continue and to resolve conflict? A sense of welcome and belonging at the school, and a strong sense of common mission. Next slide. And so we've developed a school community well-being measure that asks 4 questions in each of those 5 domains: good relationships, proficient leadership, healthy practices, satisfying community, and strong mission, asking not just how the students are doing, but how they perceive the school as flourishing in these various domains as a community. Next slide. And of course, that community flourishing is important in its own right, but it's important because students are embedded in these educational contexts, embedded in the context of their teachers and the life of the school itself. Of course, critical also to the success of the school are the system, policies, and practices, either at the school level or at a network level with regard to promoting the educational outcomes of students. Many standard metrics are very helpful in this regard that are already being used concerning teacher quality assessments of the curriculum, assessments of various pedagogical approaches, possibly value-added assessments. National and international metrics of various sorts are, of course, relevant here. But this is something that many school systems are already doing quite well, but once again, central to the work of schools. And then the third pillar at the institutional level, not just the character of the students, but really what is the school offering to shape character, to form students? What sort of programs are in place to help students in their social, emotional, and character development? And how do students perceive what is on offer and the role of the school and its values in shaping them? Are there programs or interventions specifically oriented towards enhancing character formation for students? Next slide. And so over the last few years, we have been working on not just developing this theoretical framework and this framework for metrics, but also operationalizing it. And really that's what our Flourishing School Project consistent, trying to carry out data collection to identify the strengths and weaknesses of different schools and school networks, to celebrate those strengths, to work on areas for growth across those different pillars. And so Christina will talk more about the operationalization, but essentially what we focused on is pillars 1 and 3, both at the individual level and at the community level. The individual level educational attainment metrics and the existing assessments of schools and curricula, while certainly improvements might be helpful, are already being carried out quite extensively. Whereas student flourishing, community well-being, character formation, and school program offerings are less frequently employed. So, as I briefly noted, with regard to student flourishing, we're using adolescent and even younger flourishing metric equivalents that we've developed at our program. With regard to individual assessment of character strengths, we've worked out an agreement with the VIA Institute to use their VIA Inventory of Strengths for Youth to look at the various character strengths present at these various schools. With regard to school flourishing, we're using the school community well-being assessment. And then finally, we've developed, in part based on the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtue framework, on character being caught, taught, and sought, various assessments for what schools are offering to students with regard to character formation. And so Christina will go into greater detail on each of these and on our Flourishing Schools project more generally, which, again, we are inviting school networks to join us in. And with that, I will hand things over to Christina.
Thank you so much, Tyler. So as Tyler said, to operationalize this theoretical framework that he just shared, we're launching our Flourishing Schools Project. And so I'm going to tell you all about that project. And to begin, I'd like to tell you a bit of history of the initiative. So does anyone know who this is? If you do, please say in the chat. So yes, this is John Dewey. And John Dewey, he really envisioned creating what he called laboratory schools to integrate research and practice in the field of education in an analogous way that teaching hospitals integrate research and practice in the field of medicine. And so he wanted to make sure that practical needs on the ground were shaping research directions, and that what was happening in schools was actually grounded in what we know from science of what works. And so he did set up a laboratory school at the University of Chicago, and many of his most influential works came out of that collaborative work with practitioners. So building on John Dewey's original vision, we launched the Research Schools Initiative, which was to create partnerships with schools around the world that would help integrate research and practice. So we founded Research Schools International, and over the past 15 years, we've carried out 80 research and professional development projects that are similar to this Flourishing Schools project across 70 countries. So we have quite a lot of experience and expertise in this work that will be informing this new project that we're launching. It's really a project to scale this work that we've been doing with individual schools in school networks. So it's quite exciting. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this, but first I want to play a video that gives an overview of our vision here for our research schools.
One of the things that's true in industries all over the world is that many of them have established research programs.
In teaching hospitals, doctors are working alongside practitioners to make sure that research and practice are always integrated and linked. However, in education, that's the exception, not the rule.
I think we've always had single schools doing interesting things, but it's much more powerful if you have a network of schools. I suspect the reason research schools in the United States have not been successful is because the different constituents haven't been as aligned as they should be.
John Dewey actually formulated that as a goal in 1896, so we know it can be done, and we have some good ideas about how to do it effectively.
Now what we're trying to do is recreate that vision and expand it to multiple schools around the world.
This year, for the first time, Christina Hinton and I are teaching a course that involves students working with teachers to actually formulate research questions that they would like addressed in their classes.
Teachers by nature are curious, they're seeking information, and if you provide an opportunity for them to ask questions that are meaningful, you'll find people who are interested.
I'm very much in favor of evidence-based practice. So it's really pushed me to try something that I wouldn't have tried myself. And I think it inspires students to see their teachers learning along with them.
For me personally, doing the research really has strengthened my role as a teacher. I think it's really given me an opportunity to step back. It's really broadened my vision.
It can be very inspiring for the school because they're really a part of improving education on a global scale.
As a school, we've always prided ourselves on our ability to innovate. Therefore, I'm really inspired by the idea that we can close the gap between research and practice.
Too often in education, there's a significant time lag between what researchers are finding out and schools finding out about it. It's an amazing opportunity for us to be able to work with people who are right at the cutting edge and hear it directly from them.
It's important to involve the community, the schools involved, the research community, and for all three of them to have input. I think if you have that kind of alignment, the chances that a study will make a difference are much greater.
The frequency of conversations about teaching and learning, the vocabulary that's used very much reflects having been involved with the research.
It really makes us more like partners, and I think that that really has strengthened my role as a teacher. Just having that ongoing dialogue is so important.
It is totally worth the time, the payoff in trying something different, in assessing your own performance. I wholeheartedly endorse it.
If this is something that you would be interested in, we would love to communicate with you to figure out how we might be helpful to you in establishing a research agenda at your school.
Okay, so out of this work, what has kind of become clear from working with schools all over the world in this way and talking to practitioners, day in and day out, is that there's a real need to support character skills and holistic well-being or flourishing. And so our focus of this project has really grown from the ground up of the needs on the ground of schools that have expressed to us. They've been asking us, please, can you help support us with character skills and flourishing? And so that's kind of how this project came about. And as I said, we're now wanting to scale this work. We've tested it so many times in so many schools all over the world, but we want to scale it by having school networks join us and sign up the schools across their network into this work so we can spread it really around the world. So that's our hope. So that's how this project came about. And so we have now in this new Flourishing Schools Project, which is similar to the others, but a new version of it. We've piloted this exact project already a few times. So we piloted it with Scots College in Australia in 2025, and then with Upper Canada College and Alliance in Canada and the UK in 2026. And so we had some lessons learned from that as well. And now we're inviting school networks to join our Flourishing Data Collaborative. So schools that join will participate in a Flourishing Schools survey on character skills and flourishing, as well as evidence-based practices that promote those outcomes. So the survey includes the youth flourishing measures for ages 9 to 11 and 12 to 18, which are developmentally appropriate versions of the flourishing measure that Tyler shared. The community well-being measure, because as Tyler emphasized, we don't flourish on an island on our own, we flourish in community and in context. And so we want to know about the flourishing of the whole community. It includes measures of character skills. We use the VIA youth character skills measures. And then it includes about 50 evidence-based practices that have been shown in research to support character skills and flourishing. And these practices came from a synthesis of a review that we've done across the literature broadly in collaboration with OECD, in collaboration with UNESCO, in collaboration with the Jubilee Center. And so we kind of distilled what are the ones that have the most evidence and put them in our survey. And then it also includes some demographic questions. And I'll tell you a bit more about this, but basically this data is then analyzed to identify strengths and areas for growth in promoting character skills and flourishing. And just to mention that this has been approved from the Institutional Review Board at Harvard. So there's kind of a blanket IRB approval for this already. And to join the Flourishing Data Collaborative, it'll be 10,000 American dollars per school. So if you want to join, that is the cost. So schools that participate will receive a report of the findings, which will show a number of things, including where students are scoring on character skills, on flourishing, various domains of flourishing, and so forth. So I'll tell you a bit more about that as well. So just to give you an example of what this would look like, and I'm not sharing all of the results here, there's much, much more in the report, but this is just to highlight the kinds of things we're looking at. So this schools will have, for example, the flourishing score. We'll be able to benchmark this against flourishing schools scores in other schools and school networks. So you can get a sense of how the students are doing. We have flourishing scores by age as well. So often, for example, in our partner schools, we found that the flourishing would gradually decline across the years as students are faced with things like high stakes exams and university admissions and all of those pressures. And so if you see that trend in your school or your school network, you can think, okay, how might I support those students in the later years so that they can flourish as much as the younger students? And so this is the kind of insight you can get is, oh, this particular subgroup really could use some support. We also look at flourishing across the domains that Tyler shared. So you might find, for example, that your students are scoring high on a sense of meaning, but maybe the relationships aren't as strong as they could be, or the happiness isn't as high as it could be. So it gives you insights also into what aspects of flourishing, because it's a multidimensional, holistic concept, students might need extra support with. Or again, we often find mental health at the moment across schools, across countries can be low. So that can, again, kind of flag a need there. And so just understanding like where are we strong and where could we make some further steps in our school network. We also look at a whole range of character strengths, as I mentioned. So you can think about these and how they apply to your school. So for example, if you have certain character strengths in your mission or in your value statement, you might want to hold that up against this and consider, are we scoring high on the ones that we say are our priority or that we stand for at our school? And if not, what can we do about that? And if so, great, right? So it just, again, it kind of holds a mirror up on if this is what you're trying to accomplish, how are you doing on it? And which ones it opens a conversation as well of which ones are a priority and are we accomplishing that? And then, as we mentioned, there's a whole range of evidence-based practices to promote character skills and flourishing that we look at. And so we've kind of categorized them following the Jubilee framework of caught, taught, and sought. So caught is kind of absorbed through daily life, for example, through modeling. Taught is in the formal curriculum, and sought is actively pursued. So again, these are just some examples. We have much more than this, but just to give you an idea, we look at things like school mission, values, and culture in the caught piece. Another really important part of the caught piece is relationships. This cannot be underestimated, the importance of relationships for flourishing and having strong relationships. So it can give schools insights. For example, let's say that your teacher-student relationships are very strong. The students report that they're very strong, but then the peer relationships are reported less strong. That would let the school know, maybe we should do something to support peer relationships. Do we have a peer mentor program? Do we have friendship interventions? Do we have other initiatives to support peers? Can we put some more in, for example? Or, do we have social time where students actually spend time together? So not breaks where they're all on their phones, but breaks where they're not on their phones, so that they can develop those really crucial supportive social relationships. And so again, it's just a way to reflect on where are we at and where might we improve. And then we also look at the formal curriculum. So it can show you things like in this example data, and by the way, this is example data, it's not from a school. So like, let's say there's English lessons that incorporate quite a lot of about character skills development, but less so lessons in history, right? In this example, then you might think, okay, let's celebrate what's going on in our English lessons, and maybe the English, faculty could talk to the history faculty. Maybe they could collaborate on how we might incorporate more character skills into the history lessons, for example. Um, or maybe you think that makes sense in the case of your school, and that's fine as well. But again, it's just a reflection for the school to really think through these issues. Where might there be areas for growth? And so in our actual curriculum. Um, and then finally, for example, volunteering. There's quite a lot of empirical research showing that it can promote your flourishing. Including, I find surprising, even your physical health. So it can improve your cardiovascular health markers, for example, which is kind of amazing. So we look at that, for example, what volunteering opportunities are there at the school? And we know that volunteering is most effective for students when it's sustained over time so that they can build meaningful relationships with the communities they're working with. And so we might look at, for example, that's one of our questions. So is it not just a one-off volunteering, but is it really a deeper experience that the students can participate in? So again, it just tells you, what's going well, what you have to celebrate at your school and share as going well, and what you might improve on. And so Research Schools International is partnering on this project to offer optional follow-up professional development for schools that are interested. So once schools have their survey results, we're offering a program that helps schools unpack those results and think about how they relate to their school's particularly goals related to promoting character skills and flourishing. So kind of what I was saying, for example, of what is our mission? What character skills are we aiming for? How do these results inform that, etc. And so we have a workshop that kind of helps unpack the findings, and then we have a follow-up virtual action research program. And in that program, we basically guide the practitioners to create and implement interventions to target areas for growth that have been identified by the research, as well as reflect on the impact of those interventions. So that might be, as the example I gave, we're scoring quite low in peer relationships. What could we create and implement to support peer relationships? And the way that this typically works practically is the educators meet in person at their school and virtually with our research team once a month. And we really guide them through this process of design, implementation, and reflection on those interventions. So it's a way of taking the research and making sure we're making a change on the ground. And we encourage schools to participate in cycles of this. So they would, take our Flourishing Schools measure, potentially do the follow-up professional development, then take the measure to see where they are, do some follow-up work, take the measure, do some follow-up work over time. So that basically over time they can integrate their vision for character skills and flourishing with what they're actually doing on the ground. And so we encourage this kind of cyclic approach over time. So if you're interested in getting on board, this is our expression of interest form. Suzanne will put it into the chat, or you can use the QR code here. And we'd love to hear from you. I'll leave that up for a moment and then move on. And then eventually, if you do decide that you want to sign your network up, these would be the steps. So there's an official sign-up form that you would fill in. Then you would invite the schools in your network to participate, and they have a sign-up form for those who want to participate. And we have a data use authorization agreement, and then the payment is made to Harvard, where typically the network collects the payments and pays Harvard. But that's kind of the process when we eventually get to signing up. So we wanted to open it up for questions and answers. So you can go ahead and share any questions you have in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christina, and thank you all for participating. I've had a chance to look through a few of the questions already present, but feel free to add others. I might comment on a few of those to give Christina a chance now also to look through the Q&A as well, and then she can comment on some of the other questions as well. There was a comment and question on student voices being part of the process and assessments, and Christina can talk about this further, but there's an opportunity to have qualitative questions where students can express what has been most helpful for them and also what may be missing. And so while we won't be having that data in the individual reports because those are intended to be scalable, the data will be made available to the schools and the school networks as well. So that qualitative data will allow for student voices to be expressed and heard. There was another question about data availability. Once again, the data will be available within each network to the network, and the individual school data to the individual schools for potential analyses and reflection that extend beyond the report. The report goes into some detail with regard to student flourishing, school community well-being, the character strengths and areas for growth, the student perceptions of what's being offered at the school, and goes through some breakdown by demographic categories as well. But of course, there's a lot more that can be done with the data than is in the report. And so these reports will allow for some initial reflections, but the data for further consideration as to insights with regard to schools. The hope is that by working with networks, schools would be able to share the results and compare the results with one another. And when one school's strengths is another's weakness, there might be a sharing of best practices across the network. Likewise, there was a question with regard to cost and cost being for some schools prohibitive. I think another advantage of working at the network level is that there is the possibility to design the payments in such a way that if some schools within a network are more resourced and some less so, that systems can be developed so as to enable those schools with fewer resources to participate as well. I could comment on some of the other ones, but perhaps I'll hand things over to Christina to comment on further questions that she may have thoughts on, or some of the others I've touched upon already.
Thank you. Yes, I see a couple questions I'm going to address here that kind of combine together. So someone was asking if there's a database of results, aggregated or otherwise, that schools can participate in. Yes, we're actually working on building a platform that will host the follow-up professional development, and we hope to have evidence-based interventions that target character skills and flourishing that are searchable. And we hope to make that piece freely available so any school anywhere in the world can benefit. And so we have it in our mind to build that over time to basically offer these education for flourishing resources publicly eventually. We're working on that. And in terms of student voice, I wanted to mention that, yes, RSI also offers a Youth for Youth Flourishing program as a follow-up. So that's where students actually design and implement interventions to promote flourishing among other youth. So we are involving students in that too, and sometimes parents as well. We have requirements or preconditions to be eligible. I think we're really just interested in schools that are passionate about implementing evidence-based practice and share our vision for education for flourishing.
There was a question on the number of schools in a network, and we realize the size of these school networks vary considerably, and are hoping longer term to have as many participate as are interested. At least with this first round during the 2026-2027 academic year, we're looking for school networks with at least 20 schools, where hopefully at least 10 are participating. The model that we're proposing is an opt-in model where not all schools within the network would need to participate. But as you can imagine, it takes quite a bit to build the infrastructure that we have for each network. So we're hoping that if a school network does participate, at least 10 schools would be participating, and ideally the network size would be 20 schools or larger. But there are, of course, other networks with 500, 1,000 or more schools, and we've tried to develop this in a way that is scalable across schools. So working with school networks allows us to do this. And as Christina mentioned earlier, we have received IRB approval through Harvard to do this at scale. We have an umbrella IRB, which would allow for all participating schools. And we are only at present allowed to collect de-identified data because of the IRB requirements and the need to scale this. That might be altered over time, but certainly the first couple of years of this Flourishing Schools project, we'd be working only with de-identified data. And so that relates to another question that came up, which was tracking individual students over time. And that longitudinal panel data is what is necessary to begin to draw conclusions about causation, about what might be affecting what else. And at present, we do not have the capacity to do that. So we are hoping schools would participate over multiple years, which would allow one to look at changes, trying to attribute those changes to in flourishing or character development to particular interventions wouldn't be particularly possible with data. But as changes are being made, one hopes, of course, the flourishing and character strength scores to be increasing. Over time, as this initiative grows, we, again, may acquire the capacity to link individual student responses with each other over time. And we hope eventually also to extend this to perceptions of teachers, of school leaders, perhaps eventually to parents as well. But in terms of beginning to build this infrastructure and these networks of schools reflecting on flourishing and on character development together, it seemed, of course, important to begin with the students themselves.
And it's worth mentioning that the Human Flourishing Program, Harvard and RSI did carry out a longitudinal study on evidence-based practices that promote flourishing with 22,000 students. And so that study, which could say, there's strong evidence that this is causally related to the outcome of flourishing, has informed the design of this project. So even though this particular project isn't doing that, we have done some of that work.
We've carried out a great deal of longitudinal studies, both in the education space and elsewhere in numerous settings. And as Christina mentioned, much of the work that we're doing is grounded in those longitudinal analyses. The goal with the Flourishing Schools Project, at least initially, was to bring this to scale. And so that's why the current infrastructure is what it is at present. We're hoping to reach as many schools and school networks as possible. But again, we see this hopefully as simply the beginning of a long-term project to enable both the promotion of student flourishing and character development, but ultimately also longer-term research as well to understand not just the distribution, but also the determinants of flourishing in educational and school settings.
It's also worth mentioning, as Tyler said, right, we're starting with schools that can sign up for this, but our vision eventually is to have a diverse network of schools participating in this, and also to disseminate findings and lessons learned to the global education community. So, for example, on the platform I mentioned and other ways. And so we'll be disseminating what we learn so other educators all around the world can benefit from it as well. And we'll be, of course, recognizing our partner school networks as thought leaders in this collaborative work as we disseminate that. And so, so we're really inviting you to join us in this mission in some ways.
Seems there were also a couple of questions with regard to socioeconomic and material and personal challenges that students might be facing, and of course this is a critical issue as well. Part of the flourishing assessment does look at student perceptions of their own home environment, and whether the family has enough to to get by. And so the assessment, while it doesn't focus extensively on those aspects, does provide a lens by which one can examine our students in general or particular groups of students really struggling with these matters. The report also looks at, for example, how students are doing with respect to parental educational status, so that when particular groups are struggling, special efforts could be made to both enhance flourishing and perhaps special character development or intervention or skills programs be offered to students struggling more. Again, in addition to what's in the report, more data will be available by our handing over the data itself. So we do recognize these are important, critical matters. Certainly, and there's more on this in the paper on the scope of education for flourishing and also in our metrics framework. What we've tried to focus on in our data collection are aspects of what might enhance student flourishing that are in principal control of the schools themselves. So many of these socioeconomic matters are critical from a policy perspective, are clearly shaping student outcomes and student learning, do need to be addressed. Schools have some role to play, but of course don't have complete control over these matters. And so as per those papers and our framework and really our data collection efforts, what we've focused on, not exclusively, but principally, are those aspects and factors of student flourishing that are in principal control of schools and educational leaders to make a difference on.
Yes. And I see Andy Wolf, hi Andy, as asking, could a large network of schools get involved in this? You mentioned, for example, 20, but what about 50? Absolutely. That is actually our hope, is the larger the better, because we're hoping to have as much impact as possible. So if you have a large network of schools, please let us know. We would love to have you involved. And I see another question was whether this is open to primary schools. The issue is that basically you can only get valid data from ages about 9 and up on these types of surveys. As Tyler mentioned, we've been experimenting with a flourishing measure for ages 5 to 8, which we may eventually make available as part of this project. In the meantime, RSI does work with younger primary schools, so you're welcome to reach out to us. The way we typically do that is asking the educators about the students, since we can't survey the students directly in most cases, or doing interviews, which is of course not as scalable. So, but eventually we do hope that this project will also include surveys for educators and surveys potentially for parents. So eventually we will be moving in that direction over time to be able to include primary schools in this project as well.
But yeah, as Christina said, at present, we're doing this with secondary schools and also with primary middle schools ages 9 through 12. I mean, we have piloted the survey with students as young as 9, and it seems to be working reasonably well. But to make this scalable, we need, at present at least, to restrict ourselves to ages at which this survey-based approach is indeed possible. As I noted earlier, the flourishing assessment for adolescents ages 12 to 18 has been adapted from our adult measure and piloted in quite a number of settings. That assessment changes 4 of the 12 flourishing questions to be more age appropriate, and then our flourishing assessment for 9 to 11-year-olds uses the same domains of happiness, health, meaning, character, relationships, and financial security, but modifies all 12 questions to be more age appropriate. But again, that does seem to be performing quite well in survey research to date as well.
Someone's asking, is there a particular geography or demographic you would like representation in this initiative? So at the moment, we're starting with English-speaking schools, but we could fairly easily adapt this to other languages in the future. So we're really open, I would say, globally. Schools do need to have internet access to take the survey. It's an online survey, so that would be the one kind of constraint, I would say. And again, we're hoping to move toward a diverse network over time.
And I did put this in the chat earlier, but I'm putting in again a link to our Flourishing Schools Project web page, which has more information on the project itself, along with next steps. It has some of the academic papers that formed the theoretical and measurement foundation of this project. It also has a sample report for schools. This is still being refined, and suggestions at this stage, at least, are welcome, but it would give you a sense as to what this would look like for schools. As I said before, that the data will also be handed over to the schools and school networks for further analyses. In addition to the school level report, networks would be receiving a network level report, which will allow for some benchmarking within network, and also likewise, allow for an understanding of the strengths and potential areas for growth within a given school network. Also, so more information. Along with our Flourishing Schools Project brochure is available on that website. And of course, feel free to share it with other schools, network leaders, and anyone else you think might be interested.
And I also just want to thank you for joining us here. Even though I'm an academic, my real passion is to work with educators who are in school who actually have the capacity to make real world impact in real, students' lives and educators' lives and potentially parents as well. And so we're just really grateful for the partnership that you offer to actually make our work meaningful on the ground. So thank you for, being open to these ideas and continuing this conversation with us.
Likewise. And yes, the final question. This was recorded. We will be posting the recording, and happy to share the slides as well. And feel free to follow up with us if you're interested in participating in this Flourishing Schools project, or if you have other suggestions. But thank you all for participating today, and we look forward to hopefully working with a number of you on this Flourishing Schools project in the years ahead. We hope, again, to help form students and help promote flourishing for all. Thank you all again.